Hey you! Welcome to my channel, A Year and a Day. My name is Jenny and this is the wrap-up video for my 2022 low buy year. Now I did a first and second quarter update, but felt it was getting a bit boring. So I decided to skip the third and fourth quarter updates and do a wrap-up video instead, talking about my experience and show you the stuff I ended up getting. Now, quick recap before we dive into the show and tell. Last year I noticed my own consumerism got a bit out of hand. I was buying stuff left, right and center for what started feeling more and more like the wrong reasons. Wrong reasons for me were seeking out a quick dopamine hit when ordering stuff online. Ordering stuff because I was bored or just needed something to look forward to. Reasons like that have very little to do with the actual product you're buying. It has much more to do with your own consumerism and behavior and seeking out that quick dopamine hit when ordering stuff online. So I decided to make 2022 a low buy year, focusing on my two biggest problem areas, books and tarot. General goal was to buy stuff for the right reasons, meaning this product is unique and will bring me a lot of joy, or this product will be of use to me, or this product will teach me something. And on top of that, I created some additional rules. For books, I didn't set a maximum amount of books I was allowed to get in the year, but I did decide I had to read the books I got in the short term. So no more collecting pretty hardcover editions or buying books I plan to read one day. For Tarot and Oracle, the rules were more strict. I first made a list of all the pre-orders and Kickstarters I was expecting for 2022. There were about 6 of them arriving in the year. I then set a limit for myself. In addition to those 6 Tarot and Oracle pre-orders I was already expecting, I could get no more than 6 other new Tarot or Oracle decks and back 3 Kickstarters. Together that would be 12 new decks for 2022 and probably some Kickstarters to look forward to in 2023. And considering I already have a lovely collection to work with, I seriously thought 12 would be more than enough. Now, let's see how my low buy year turned out, shall we? Starting with books. Spoiler alert, I failed. Amazon price drops and eBay proved to be my kryptonite. And I ended up getting a staggering 28 new books in 2022, while only reading a handful of them. Let's take a look at what I got and why, and then do a little evaluation. If there's one thing that I have learned about myself this past year, is that I love doing deep dives. And at the start of 2022, the topic of my deep dive was tarot and tarot history. So of course, the books that I got at the start of this year were related to that topic. Let's start with the history of tarot art, demystifying the art and arcana deck by deck, by Holly Adams Easley and Esther Joy Archer. Now, this is actually a book that I did read cover to cover at the start of 2022. And I really think it's a very enjoyable read. It goes through the history of tarot and it features historical decks, but it also moves into the more modern times. It's a really easy to get through writing style, and it featured a lot of the decks that I already knew about, but it also gave me plenty of new information about the deck, the creation and the role the deck played in tarot history. And overall, I thought this was a really lovely and enjoyable read. And that's the history of tarot art. Now, to be honest, I could have stopped there. But when I'm doing a deep dive, it is very easy for me to get caught up in the moment and my own enthusiasm. And I see all these really good resources full of information, and there's this strong gotta catch them all vibe that I get. And 2022, and doing my low buy year, really taught me that it is very easy for me to get swept away in that. So, after reading one book on tarot history, I of course had to get another book on tarot history. So I really love the look and feel of this book. It has this kind of linen cover. And again, we are kind of going through the same topics as we did before. There were a lot more decks in this one that I had not heard of. But the thing was, I was kind of already fulfilled in my deep dive at this moment when I got this. So I read a little bit of it, but then I put it aside and I haven't picked it up since. And now going through it, I feel really inspired to really read this one cover to cover as well, because it's filled with so much interesting information and knowledge. And it's such a shame to have such a beautiful book in your collection and just not ever having to have read it. So that's Iconic Tarot Decks, and I have not read it yet. But then, of course, I couldn't stop myself, and I had to get a third book on tarot history. And that is the Tarot and Divination Cards, a Visual Archive. Now, as you can see, again, this is a beautiful edition. It's quite a big book. Again, the design is really lovely. And it's just a very lovely book to add in my collection. I liked for this one that they kind of constructed the book a little bit differently than the previous two. They basically go through a tarot deck card by card and suit by suit and kind of deep dive for every card and really look at the history of those cards. So in that way, it really is a good addition to the other two books that I just showed. And again, lots of information in this one and lots of beautiful artwork and photography that has been added. But the page marker here is a sad indication of how little I actually read from this book. It maybe has also something to do with the fact that I really expect myself to read a book cover to cover, to read every book I get cover to cover. And especially with books like these that are just absolutely filled to the brim with information, it is very hard for me to keep my attention on the book. So let's keep that in mind when we discuss my lessons learned at the end of this. These are two books by Andy Matzner, Journaling the Tarot Evolutions and Tarot for Transformation. So Tarot for Transformation focuses on the major arcana cards, and Journaling the Tarot Evolutions focuses on all the 78 cards of the tarot. These are great resources to grab every now and then when you are journaling, when you are working with tarot, and just dive a little bit deeper into the meaning of the cards and look at it a little bit from a different point of view. They are great resources and I'm happy to have them. I was able to pick them up on Amazon for a very reasonable price. Again, not books that I have read cover to cover, but these ones I really see as being more of like a reference guide and not so much a book you have to read cover to cover. So very happy to have these two in my collection. So those were the books I got in the first quarter of 2022. We now move forward into the second quarter of 2022, when I was preparing for our holiday in Norway. And I went from one deep dive topic to another because I got this book by John Muir. John Muir's Book of Animals. And this was just a delightful book containing fragments of the work of John Muir relating to all kinds of animals. The book is beautifully illustrated, and John Muir's writing style and view of the world and the natural world was just absolutely delightful. And a perfect book to read prior and during our travels to Norway. And again, this could have been it. This could have been enough. But not for me, because this one catapulted me into a whole John Muir love affair. And I ended up getting 3 more books by John Muir. My First Summer in the Sierra, The Mountains of California, and The Wild Muir, containing several essays. So I started with My First Summer in the Sierra, and of course intended to move on to The Mountains of California and then to the essays. But in the end I kind of lost my attention within 30 pages, which is again a very sad thing, but something that I will admit in this video. Yeah, I'm not sure if I will pick them up again or if I maybe have to readjust my reading strategy, meaning that again I'm not expecting myself to read this cover to cover in a few sittings, but rather read a couple of chapters or paragraphs and read it next to another book I'm reading. That might be a better way for me to keep my attention on a book like this. And because I was very into nature and views on nature and how we as humans influence nature, I also got this book on environmental philosophy. This one I haven't finished either. It's just ridiculous. Parts that I did read were very interesting, but also when I disagree with stuff that is being said in a book like this, I tend to get very frustrated and annoyed because you can yell at the book, but it's not a discussion. The words are just there. So I got a bit frustrated here and there and then kind of lost interest. Again, this is a topic that really interests me in general, so I might get back to this one in the future as well. And that's a book on environmental philosophy. Right after returning from Norway, I wanted to keep my connection to the beautiful landscapes I had seen there for as long as possible. So I decided to treat myself on 2 books on famous Norwegian painters. Starting with In Front of Nature, the European landscapes of Thomas Fearnly. I had not really known a lot about this painter, so it was just really lovely to deep dive a little bit into the life and work of this artist. And again, I felt very obligated to read this book cover to cover and started that journey, but quit halfway through. Still, it is a lovely book to go through sometimes when I miss Norway and I just want to be reminded of the beauty of the landscapes there. That's the book about Thomas Fearnly, and I also got this beautiful book, Paintings by Peder Balke. This is a lovely hardcover edition containing loads of beautiful paintings. It's a book I enjoy just going through every now and then. That's Paintings by Peder Balke. In 2022 I got 4 books on creativity. Let's start with the Law's Guide to Nature Drawing and Journaling, written and illustrated by John Muir Laws. No relation to the John Muir we talked about earlier, by the way. But John Muir Laws is well known for his books on drawing and journaling, and I absolutely love this, but to be completely honest, I was absolutely intimidated by this book. At the start of this year, I tried to sketch almost daily, and I tried to improve my sketches of birds. The thing is, when I go through those sketches now, I do see improvement. But when I was trying at the start of this year, it felt like a complete mission impossible. Especially when looking at a book like this, filled with illustrations that seem so effortless. And I think in the end I got a bit discouraged with sketching. So this is a beautiful source of inspiration and guidance. But for now it has mostly discouraged me in my sketching journey. Earth Color, an 8-week art course for nature connection, was a pre-order I placed when hearing about the release of this book. This is a book published by Liminal 11. I already had another book by this creator, so I thought it would be a great idea to add this one as well. But by the time I got it, I was kind of not sketching and watercoloring that much anymore, and it ended up just sitting in my bookcase. So it's a lovely book, and hopefully one day it will inspire me to grab my watercolors once again and try to see if I can finish this 8-week art course. The 30-day Sketchbook Project by Minnie Small was another pre-order I placed as soon as I learned of this book. Minnie Small is an artist living in London, and she creates the most enjoyable YouTube videos about her life as an artist. I really love her work and I love how she shares her process with her viewers. And I really wanted to support her by buying this book, even though I haven't really done any deep dive in this book yet. And then in the second half of 2022, I got into this whole obsession with creating clothes for dolls. And this is the book that I got for that. And out of the 4 creative books I got in 2022, this is the one I absolutely used the most. The book starts with all these beautiful pictures of dolls and the tiny wardrobe you can make for them. It's so whimsical and I want all of the clothes I see here in my size as well. Then the book also contains step-by-step instructions that mostly I found very easy to follow as a beginner. And even when some things seemed absolutely impossible at the start, following these instructions allowed me to create stuff that I had really thought were impossible before. And in the back you have all the patterns you can use to create the clothes. I'm very happy that I got this book, but I'm also very happy that I actually used the book. It's not just something that I have collected and that's sitting in a corner making me feel guilty for not reading it. This is a book that really had its use and I'm very happy I got it and its tiny wardrobe. So those were the non-fiction and creative books that I got in 2022. And the last category regarding books that I can show you is basically my kryptonite category because it's fiction books and it's collecting beautiful editions of those books. So let's take a look. The book that kickstarted my little inner collector was this gorgeous hardcover edition of Dune. And it's just a very lovely edition. As you can see, it has blue edges and a lovely dust cover. It also contains a map of Dune. And I am happy to report that I actually did read this book in 2022. I had already read this book once when I was about 18 and really always had been wanting to reread it in English. And it was a fantastic read. It's a very quick-paced adventure story at the surface. And when you dive a little deeper, there are all these way bigger topics and themes. So it was able to hold my attention, even though this is quite a chunker of a book. And of course, I cannot stop with just one book about Dune. This is actually the graphic novel, book 2. I already had book 1, so when this one got published, I had to get it. But this was already going against the rules of my low buy year because I have not yet read this one. And after reading the book and rewatching the latest movie adaptation, I kind of moved away from Dune again and I have not yet read the graphic novel. So hopefully in 2023 I will be able to get around to these. After Dune, I decided to read a book I already had in my collection, but had not read yet. And it was called Girlstruck Island by Frances Hardinge. I really love Frances Hardinge as a writer. I have read Fly by Night and Twilight Robbery by her. I really like her books, so of course this sent me into another little rabbit hole, because I would really love to read all of her books, but I not yet have all of her books, so that needed to change. I got these two beautiful editions of A Skinful of Shadows and Deeplight. I absolutely love the dust cover designs of these ones. So I'm really happy with these two because I know I will read these books. I am on a quest to read all the books by Frances Hardinge. I really enjoy her work, so I have no doubt that I will read this somewhere in 2023. But these are still not all the books by Frances Hardinge. And in my quest to collect all of her books, I came across The Lie Tree. And I found out that there actually had been a special limited edition hardcover version of The Lie Tree, illustrated by Chris Riddell, who happens to be one of my favorite illustrators. So of course I wanted to get that special edition, but it was sold out everywhere or ridiculously priced, so I turned to eBay. So I had never really ordered anything from eBay before, believe it or not. And I'm not sure it's a good thing that I now discovered eBay, because it sent me down a whole other rabbit hole. I got this book for under 10 euros. It's a little bit banged up. It's not completely in mint condition or new, but it is that hardcover edition illustrated by Chris Riddell. And for under 10 euros, I am really not complaining, and I'm very happy that I was able to add this to the collection. And I'm looking forward to reading this one next year. I then found out that Chris Riddell had created a book series with Paul Stewart about dragons. The hardcover editions of these books were also not available anywhere, but they were on eBay. So for just a couple of euros a piece, I was able to get all three of these. Again, they are not in mint condition, they have some wear and tear about them. One actually was an old library book, I believe, still containing some ugly stickers. But again, for a few euros, it was lovely to be able to add them to my collection. Like I said, Amazon price drops and eBay turned out to be kind of my kryptonite in 2022. When I have a beautiful book on my wish list and Amazon suddenly decides to drop the price to 10 or 15 euros, I just cannot resist. I grab my chance to get a book I already wanted for a very affordable price. Low buy year or not. And this is how I got Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I saw this book around on BookTube a bit. It seemed like a very lovely hardcover edition containing several illustrations. And when the price dropped, I grabbed my chance at adding this to my collection. Same goes for Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, illustrated by Marjolein Bastin. This is a lovely series of illustrated classics where Marjolein Bastin, who is a famous Dutch illustrator, has illustrated the books with very lovely nature-based illustrations, but also the book contains all kinds of little extras that follow the story of the book. And from the same series I already have Pride and Prejudice, which is my favorite Jane Austen novel. But the other editions in this series are usually pretty pricey. They are around 35 euros each, but this one dropped to like 15 euros and I just grabbed my chance and got this one. And that's Wuthering Heights. And same goes for Witchcraft, which also had a major price drop on Amazon. This just seems like a beautiful resource full of information and paintings, photographs. Just a very, very extensive reference book on the history of witchcraft. I had it on my wish list for a while, and when that price drop came around, I jumped to the opportunity to grab this one. This is really new in my collection. I have not read it yet. I will not be obligating myself to read this one cover to cover, but just grab it every once in a while and read a bit from it. So that is Witchcraft by Taschen. So those were all the books that I got in 2022. All in all, there are 27 books. I'm gonna take a short lunch break and then come back to part 2 of this video, which is tarot. So let's move on to tarot. As I mentioned earlier, my rules for tarot were a little bit more strict. I was only allowed to back 3 Kickstarters in 2022 and get 6 new decks. But spoiler alert, I failed epically. Let's take a look at the decks that I got in 2022. Let's start with Kickstarters. Immediately in January, I backed the I'm Here Self-Care deck. I really like the theme of this one, and with the colors and the very simple but soft illustration style, this one really seemed like a deck that I could use in my practice. Another Kickstarter I backed was the Mimit, the Mini Mice Tarot. I absolutely adore this illustration style. This was a campaign centered around a tarot deck, but you could also back a large guidebook containing all kinds of backstory on the land that these mice live in. In the end, I only backed the tarot deck without the guidebook, so I'm kind of waiting to see if it's a tarot deck that I can work with without a large extensive guidebook, or if it's just a really nice to have, lovely illustrated tarot deck. I guess I will have to wait and see until it comes in, if it's something that will stay in my collection long term. The Blue Earth Tarot is a Kickstarter by Alison Davies, and this just seemed like such a sincere and personal art project. The artwork is pretty abstract and a little pippish, so not something I usually go for. But I just really loved the whole story behind it and the art project that it was, and I have no regret in backing this. Another Kickstarter I backed, which was also pretty abstract in its artwork, was the Soul Tarot by Kokori. I already have the Divine Feminine Tarot by them and it's absolutely lovely. The Soul Tarot is pretty abstract in its artwork, but I love the colors and I love that it was partly inspired by Dune, which I was reading around the time that I backed the Soul Tarot. In the final stretch of the year, I backed the Sleepwalker Tarot. I absolutely love the art style and the colors, and I was pretty quick in backing this one. I'm still waiting for it, so not sure how it reads yet. But the same creators created another Kickstarter, the Monsoon Tarot, which I also backed in 2022, and that one already came in. The artwork of this deck really made me think of Studio Ghibli, which was a major reason for me backing this deck. I love the artwork, although especially with the minors, there are a lot of faces missing in the characters. And the artwork therefore is sometimes a little bit inconsistent, with some cards really coming straight out of some sort of manga novel and others being much more like weird, twisted dreamscapes. I haven't worked with this deck yet, so I cannot really say if it's a good reader or not for me. I also complained a little about the color scheme of this deck, which is very, very lilac and toned down. And for me that makes it all kind of blend together. So again, I think it's really unique in my collection, being that it reminds me of Studio Ghibli so much. And at the same time, I do not know if this will be a deck that I can actually work with or will enjoy working with. So I'm not sure yet if this one will stay in my collection long term. And that's the Monsoon Tarot. We can now move on to the non-Kickstarter decks that I got in 2022. Starting with the Tempest Tarot, which I'm keeping in this random bag. It came in a very simple white tuck box. This is an ocean themed tarot deck, which is something that I didn't have yet in my collection at the time that I got this deck. The line work reminds me a little bit of the original Rider-Waite-Smith tarot. And I just really like the simple, calm style of this deck. And the kind of toned down color scheme. The minors are a bit pippish sometimes. I don't really have anything that compares to this one in my collection, and therefore I really am glad that I added it in 2022. I got the Tarot of the Divine second hand, and it was quite a surprise for me. I actually got this deck together with the Tarot of Oppositions by Lo Scarabeo, and I've already rehomed that one, but I still have the Tarot of the Divine. So Tarot of the Divine is, as it says on the book, inspired by deities, folklore and fairy tales from around the world. And the deck itself comes with this little guidebook. So I got this bigger book containing the fairy tales that are depicted within this deck. Still, it's quite a short version of the original stories, because every story gets one page. Still, it gives a little bit more information about the stories, which is very interesting. My initial thought was to do a deep dive with this deck, meaning reading the book and go through the deck card by card. And I started that process, but I didn't finish it. And it has kind of prevented me from using the deck, which is a real shame. Somehow I obligate myself to do this whole deep dive and only then really start using the deck, even if I end up not doing the deep dive. So I'm still a little bit conflicted about what to do with this deck, whether I should keep it and start using it randomly, if I should finish my deep dive. I'm not sure yet. But I do know that I love the colors and illustration style of this deck, and I'm a big fan of fairy tales, myths and storytelling. So this should be a deck that I would use a lot, or at least keep in my collection. So it's safe for now, and I will see if I will use it more in 2023. And that's the Tarot of the Divine. Next up is the Kawaii Tarot. I believe I saw this deck for the first time on the channel of Lisa Papez. And I think I ordered it within 5 minutes into the video. I really enjoyed this deck. I think the whole vibe is very uplifting and happy and hysterical in all the best ways. It's not just a novelty deck, you can actually read with this. All the symbology is there. So yeah, I have no regrets about adding this one to my collection in 2022. And that is the Kawaii Tarot. I then got 2 Tarot de Marseille, even though I'm not a huge fan of pip decks, which might explain why I have already rehomed one of them. And that's the Nouveau Tarot de Marseille. The artwork is absolutely stunning. But I just wasn't using the deck at all, and I didn't have any intention to. For some decks that's okay by me. I don't mind having them around. But for this one it just didn't spark enough joy in the end. And it would be just better to rehome a deck like that to someone who really appreciates the artwork and the deck itself. The other Tarot de Marseille I got was also a second-hand purchase, and it was Le Tarot de Marseille par Balke. I had seen this one around, and I mean the tug box is really damaged. Therefore it wasn't that expensive when I found it on a second-hand website. I really appreciate the art style on this one. But I do wonder if I should keep this in the long term. The thing is, it's a pretty dark deck. There's a little bit of blood and gore throughout this deck, which kind of prevents me from wanting to work with it. Even in the spooky months around Halloween time, this is just not a deck I really lean towards. It's a Marseille deck, so it's a pip deck, and yeah, that is also something that just doesn't really interest me at this point in my life. So I've never worked with this one, and I doubt that I ever will. So this is a deck that I might consider rehoming in 2023. And that's Le Tarot de Marseille par Balke. Another deck that I got in 2022 and already rehomed is the Old Ways Magic Oracle. I mentioned before here on the channel that somehow I just didn't really vibe with the deck. The artwork is absolutely lovely and the theme is beautiful. But somehow I didn't connect to it and it wasn't really bringing me any joy. So I ended up rehoming the deck to someone who really appreciated it, and I guess that's just the way of having a collection. There is this ebb and flow. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. What did work out was the Outgrow Yourself Oracle and Tarot deck. I etched this one in black, and I really love this deck. This is a Thoth-based tarot deck, but because there are little phrases on there, you can also use it as an oracle. I really have no interest in the Thoth, so I use this one mainly as an oracle deck. I love the colors that are being used on the black backgrounds. And I also love the rawness of the little creatures depicted. I've called these creatures my little garden demons, because in my mind these are little wild garden fae that reap havoc among the plants and in my garden shed. They really live in a world of their own, and their messages are harsh and direct, but not unkind, and meant to help me forward. So I really appreciate this deck, and I really love I have added it to my collection. And that's the Outgrow Yourself Oracle and Tarot. For my birthday, I was gifted this beautiful deck that had been on my wish list for a very long time. And it's the Arcus Arcanum Tarot, which was illustrated by a comic book illustrator in the 80s. And this deck just takes me back to my childhood, when I used to read comic books for hours and hours, and this was kind of the whole style and vibe of the books that I read back then. This is a vintage out of print copy of the deck. I usually keep this copy safely tucked away in my tarot cabinet. And I later scored this German tarot set called Berufung und Beruf, which actually used the Arcus Arcanum. And that is a little German copy of the deck that was basically a reprint for this tarot set, but it's the exact same deck in German. And this is a copy that I trimmed myself to really zoom in on the artwork. I really love it trimmed. It's almost a pocket size deck. And if I want to read with this deck, then I use this copy of it. So this one I got as a gift and this one I got myself, but no regrets there. This is one of my all-time favorites and it's the Arcus Arcanum. Another deck that I got within a few moments of seeing it was the Ellen Iona Tarot. I believe I saw this one on the channel of Krista of Crochet Witch Tarot. And I ordered this one while still watching her walkthrough, because I just immediately recognized that I love the art style, the whole vibe, the colors, and it's unlike anything that I already have. The scenes are following the Rider-Waite-Smith, but they're very zoomed in. They're almost like portraits. I love using this deck. I love pairing this deck with other decks in my collection. And I've gotten some really beautiful readings with this deck. So this is a great example for an impulse buy that I have no regrets about. And it's the Ellen Iona Tarot. Next up is the Woodland Wardens Oracle deck, illustrated by Jessica Rowe. This is a deck I pre-ordered in 2021 and received in 2022. The illustrations are absolutely beautiful. They remind me of old botanical and animal illustrations. For every card you have a plant and animal association and a keyword. But to be honest, I have used this deck a lot less than I had expected. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Because the art style is right up my alley. And the theme also really speaks to me. But for some reason I just haven't grabbed it that much this past year. Although it does pair really nicely with a few other of my decks. So this is a deck I hopefully will grab a little bit more next year. And that is the Woodland Wardens Oracle deck by Jessica Rowe. Next up is the Hollow Valley deck of symbols. I saw one of the cards online. I think it was being used in a Kickstarter campaign for a tarot cloth or something. And I immediately was just hypnotized by these beautiful illustrations. I love the handwritten font that is used. and just a very simplistic, calm illustration style. It's a black and white deck, as you can see. It's very simple and calming. I went on a little quest to see if I could get my hands on a copy of this deck, which I was able to do through Roi de Coupe, which is a French-based tarot webshop. Highly recommend that shop if you are in Europe, for example. So yeah, zero regrets for this one as well. The guidebook is lovely. It has all these concept art and sketches, kind of in this journal style in the back. And for every card you have on the left the illustration, and on the right you have keywords for the upright meaning, the reversed meaning. You get the specific symbols that are being shown with their own set of keywords and a little bit of a description. So yeah, this was another deck that I really love having in my collection, and that is the Hollow Valley deck of symbols. When visiting Roi de Coupe for the Hollow Valley deck of symbols, I noticed they also had a copy of the Roots and Wings Oracle deck. This deck had been on my wish list for a while, but with importing and shipping, it would have been very expensive for me to get from the creator. But of course, getting it from Roi de Coupe, it was very affordable. So yeah, I was ordering there anyway, and here it is, the Roots and Wings Oracle. Very soft illustration style with watercoloring illustration. On point keywords that can be used as clarifiers, for example, in a reading. This deck goes well with a lot of other decks. It has this rose petal finish, but I really love riffle shuffling this one. I have to admit, I have not used this deck as much as I had expected I would. For now, that's okay. I love having it in my collection, and also because of the white space around the illustrations, it also feels very much like a spring and summer deck. So I expect to be using this deck much more in those seasons next year. And that's the Roots and Wings Oracle deck. When I was in Norway, of course I had to get myself a Rider-Waite tarot in Norwegian. This by no means is my favorite version of the Rider-Waite Smith. I have a Centennial edition that I absolutely love, and this one I mainly got it because it's in Norwegian. I also just love the memory I have connected to this deck. I love remembering how we walked through a rainy city of Bergen, finding this little witchy shop that sold tarot decks and crystals and incense. And I love how the lady who worked there tried very kindly to persuade me to buy an English deck, because I would never learn with a Norwegian deck if I wasn't Norwegian. And I kind of had to break the news to her that this wouldn't be my first tarot deck. I don't know if I will ever really read with this deck. As you can see, it's still in order. But again, a deck I was happy to add to my collection this year. And it's the Rider-Waite Tarot in Norwegian. Another deck I got this year is the Self-Love Tarot, but to be honest, this was a Kickstarter I backed in 2021, so it only got in 2022. But this was an instant favorite in my collection. I actually keep the cards not in the tuck box, but in this little simple bag for easy access. I etched the cards in blue, and this deck is just absolutely lovely. I absolutely love the use of color in this deck. The use of warm and soft tones, but so perfectly balanced. I love the wonky figures in this deck, full of imperfections, but therefore very, very perfect for a self-love tarot. And of course the whole message of this deck is that it's not about looks or whatever. It's all about accepting yourself for who you are and being kind to yourself. So this was kind of love at first sight with this deck. I've used it quite a lot ever since I got it. The guidebook is also very lovely and of course filled with positive messages. And that's the Self-Love Tarot. And we are now moving kind of towards the end of the year. And I wasn't buying that many decks at all in the last few months of 2022. I was in the middle of a lot of things going on, mainly switching day jobs, and there was a lot of change going on. So when I saw these two expansion packs to the Spread Machine Oracle, Change and Quest, I thought they would be a perfect addition. I have the Spread Machine Oracle as well, and it's just a really lovely deck. And you could also use these decks as an actual spread machine, creating your spreads, etc. But for me, working with it as a regular oracle or as a clarifier within a reading works perfectly. And I find myself using these two little themed ones the most. So this is the one for change, and it's a little bit more on the serious, heavy side, dealing with all kinds of stuff surrounding change. And then we have a little bit more of a light-hearted expansion which revolves around quest. And basically this one is based on gaming or video gaming. So all the keywords relate to stuff from video games or role-playing games. And as a gamer myself, I really appreciate the theme of this deck. The messages are very good, very clear, and very meaningful, but there's a certain lightheartedness surrounding them. So yeah, I've really enjoyed using both of these. So those are the Spread Crafters expansion packs, Change and Quest. Another complete impulse buy was the Undersea Tarot. Now I had never seen this deck around before until I saw it somewhere online. But the illustration style immediately reminded me of comic books I love very much. And it turned out that the illustrators for this deck were actual comic book illustrators. And learning that and seeing this whole style and the kind of fantasy theme made me really want this deck. Now, this deck can be found for really high out of print prices, but I ended up finding a copy on Amazon for like 19 euros or something, and I decided to just take a little gamble and see if it would actually arrive, and it did. And to be completely honest, I am glad I didn't pay a lot of money for this deck. The art style is pretty, I love the art style, but the quality of the illustrations seems to be a bit outdated. Also, this card is very pixelated. This deck also came with blue borders, which I really hated, so I trimmed the deck, which makes the illustrations stand out a little bit better. Overall, I like having it in my collection. I like the connection to comic books, but in the end it feels mostly like a novelty deck in my collection and not like a deck I will actually read with. And that's the Undersea Tarot. And last but not least is a Compendium of Witches Oracle. This deck was originally published as an indie deck, but it has now been picked up mass market by Los Scarabeo. And the concept of the deck is that you have 30 cards containing archetypes, these are the witches, and 30 cards containing tooling and other more generic keywords. The art style is beautiful. And again, importing this as an indie deck would have been very, very expensive. So when I heard that this one was being picked up mass market, I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. I really recommend this deck. I have really enjoyed working with it since I got it. The way I have been working with it is that I pulled one of the witches from this pile and then pulled two from the other pile. And they tell really, really beautiful stories together. The deck comes with this guidebook for the witches. You have a few keywords, a short description, and a little bit of information about the witch. For the other cards, it's a few keywords and a little bit of information. So I have been really enjoying working with this deck, and that's a Compendium of Witches Oracle. And those were the decks that I got in 2022. If you have been counting along, you would have counted that I backed 6 Kickstarters instead of the 3 I was allowed to. And I got 17 new decks instead of 6. With that said, let's move into the evaluation of my low buy year 2022. If you just look at the numbers, my low buy year has been a complete fail. I got 27 new books and only read a handful of them. I backed 6 Kickstarters instead of the allowed 3. And I got 17 new decks instead of the allowed 6. So this whole thing is a giant failure, right? The crazy thing is that I have come to the conclusion that it's not. At least not completely. This low-buy year has taught me so much about my own behavior, consumerism, and what I do and do not like. It made me very mindful, and it made me focus on what I'm bringing into my home instead of just mindlessly consuming, mindlessly purchasing. And I have learned a few very important lessons. For books, my biggest lesson is that I love doing deep dives, but I also have a very small attention span. So if I am deep diving into a certain topic, I best look for one really good book on that topic and then read it cover to cover. If I buy 3 or 4 more books on that same topic, most likely I will not read those books because I've already moved on to another topic. So for next year, regarding books, my first lesson is that I should only stick to 1 book per deep dive and no more. So that's a big lesson that I will bring with me into 2023 when it comes to books. The strange thing is that I had expected my tarot purchases from 2022 would feel like a much bigger failure than my book purchases. But the crazy thing is that it's the other way around. However bad I feel about all of those books that I got and never read, at least for tarot and oracle decks I got in 2022, I actually have used most of them, and I treasure the others. And the ones that I didn't vibe with, and the ones that I didn't really intend on using or treasuring, I rehomed. But I also learned what I really do and do not like within tarot and oracle decks. For example, pip decks or Marseille really don't do it for me, at least not at the moment. So getting them, however pretty the artwork, just doesn't really feel right. I will not treasure them as much, and I will not work with them. So for 2023, note to self, no more Marseille or pip decks. I also noticed I'm at a pretty good place when it comes to my tarot and oracle collection at the moment. I see a lot of beautiful decks around, but every time I am able to pick a tarot or oracle from my own collection and say, yeah, I like that one better, and having them both would be of no added value. And it has been surprisingly easy to say no to new decks that way. And saying goodbye to decks in my collection has become easier as well. So even though if you just look at the numbers, my low-buy year was a complete fail, I have learned a lot of important lessons, and I have gotten a lot of important insight into my own consumerism and behavior. And I feel like those lessons will help me in my journey to consume less and only get things that really, truly bring me joy. And that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know in the comments if you are planning on doing a low-buy year, or if you have any certain rules for yourself when it comes to buying new stuff. I wish you all lovely holidays. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!